Hello Daily Drafters and welcome to the second limited meta update for March of the Machine. This video will pick up where the last one left off, letting you know how the format has changed in the last couple of weeks and what you should be looking out for in your next few drafts. Let's go ahead and start with a brief recap of the limited portion of Pro Tour March of the Machine, which occurred last weekend in Minneapolis. Now, unfortunately, we don't have access to all of the limited data, but we do have a few things that could be useful to us. We know that there were somewhere in the vicinity of 50 draft pods between day 1 and day 2, and we have access to the data on 32 of the decks that went 3-0 in their pod. And here is a breakdown of those trophy decks and the colors that they were running. Firstly, I want to say that I'm super impressed with the spread. Several of the consensus worst decks in the format still trophied, and the spread, even at the top, is still pretty bunched up with a lot of decks at 4 and 5 trophies. Now, what exactly can we take from this data? A little, but not a ton, because remember, the trophies of some of these consensus worst archetypes in the format were piloted by the best players in the world, who obviously have a better chance at performing well with subpar decks than you or I do, but it's still interesting to see nonetheless. So, taking that data into account, let's take a look at my deck rankings for this week. So we've got a flip of the top two decks with blue-black taking over the top spot this week, but both blue-black and blue-white are still clearly in their own best tier, and are the best two decks in the format. The only reason I have blue-black over blue-white is because I think it's easier to get a good blue-black deck than a good blue-white deck, because as soon as there's another Knights drafter at the table, it becomes very difficult to put together a blue-white deck that has everything it needs to win. I still have Blue-Red Convoke as the third best deck, but past that we have quite a bit of moving around. I have Black-Red jumping all the way up to 4th place, and Green-White dropping to 7th. Black-Green also makes a huge jump from last place all the way up to 5th, and the rest of the decks may have moved around a spot or two, but nothing too relevant. We'll now see if there's any shakeup in the best colors of the format, and there is a small change this week with green and white flip-flopping in 3rd and 4th. I think the reason I've chosen to rank them this way this week is because white has proven to be much more of a support color, and green has the ability to be a base color more often. So if you find yourself getting deep into white without a direction as to your second color, I think you'll be worse off than if you got deeper into green, but it's still relatively close in my book. And also note that there's no movement other than those two colors. Everything else is where it was in the last update. Next, we'll take a look at some specific removal spells and combat tricks in the format and how important of a player each of them are. But before we do, if you enjoy this content and would like to give back to the channel, you can do so either via the Daily Draft Patreon page with a link in the description for as little as $1 per month, where you get access to things like the Daily Draft Discord and early access to content and direct access to me in communication, or simply subscribing to the channel if a monetary contribution isn't necessarily your speed. Thanks for your consideration. At Common, we have each of these removal spells broken down into tiers of importance. This is usually the spot where I would tell you which spells have gone up or down for me in the past couple of weeks, but you know what? I think I'm happy with where I had them. Nothing's moved. The only difference in this meta update compared to our first is that I did happen to forget a couple of the common removal spells last time, so I've gone ahead and included them here, but they really aren't the relevant ones. Failed Conversion sits in tier 3, and Searing Barb and Urn of Godfire find their way into my lowest tier of removal that I really hope to never run if I can help it. At Uncommon, here's our list. Similarly to Common removal, nothing that was here during our last update has moved, but I have thrown in a couple of extra uncommon removal spells that I think are worth mentioning. We still have our 3 tier 1 removal spells here at Uncommon, but beginning with tier 2, I've thrown in Furnace Rains this week, as it technically isn't removal, but if you're playing this card, you are ideally in one of our most improved decks this week in Black-Red, and you have a way to sacrifice the creature that you've stolen. In that case, I do think this card becomes a very important piece to your deck. In tier 3, I've also included Lithomantic Barrage, because while 1 mana deal 1 isn't great, this card is an outstanding answer to one of the best decks in the format in Blue-White Knights, and just the best color in blue as well, and I think it's not the end of the world if you main deck 1 Barrage in most of your red decks. Here is this week's updated tier list for the relevant combat tricks at Common and Uncommon. We have a couple of movers this week that I'll point out to you, beginning with Aerial Boost making its way from tier 2 into tier 1. The fact that this card is essentially free more often than not makes it far too efficient to not be included in Tier 1. In Tier 2 we have a newcomer in Cyber Cryptomancer, which is technically a creature, but because it has flash and grants hexproof, I think of this more as a combat trick than a creature, and a pretty good one at that. Tier 3 remains the same with cards that are fine if they sneak into your deck, but you're not prioritizing them, and Tier 4 remains the tier of tricks that I hope to never include in my deck. I'll now go ahead and give you an update on my uncommon battle tier rankings, and we've got some movers this week. So I know these cards are small, but I'll start by showing you last week tiers so you have an idea of where our movers are, but don't worry, I'll also point each of them out as they move. Our new rankings have a singular battle in its own tier at the top, and that is Invasion of Amonkhet. This card is stupid good and should be treated as at least a rare or mythic to pull you into the best deck in the format. Tier 2 this week includes the two other battles that were in Tier 1 last week, as well as Lorwyn, Mercadia, and Kamigawa jumping up a tier. These 5 are all battles that I would love to include in any of my decks, as they all have very relevant front and back sides. Tier 3 contains most of what Tier 2 was last week, with the addition of Asgul jumping up a tier, which is largely in part because of the improvement of the black-red deck as a whole. Tier 4 remains relatively untouched, but Pyrulia and Eldraine did move up into this slightly playable tier from unplayable last week, and Tier 5 includes Kaladesh and Urgamon as this week's battles that I really hope to never run. We'll finish today here with some quick notes and individual card callouts, beginning with the fact that now more so than last week, I do believe that multicolor nonsense is totally viable in March of the Machine. For those of you that haven't seen Premier Draft number 10 posted here to the channel, go ahead and check it out for all the proof you'll ever need. My opinion on red is that you really need incredibly powerful rares or an intensely synergistic deck to be pulled into the color. Cards like Bloodfeather Phoenix and Voldaren Thrillseeker aren't currently good enough to pull me into red, but cards like Chandra and Atali are. Enduring Bondwarden is an unassuming little 1-drop, and it doesn't look too great, but this card has gone up a lot for me in the last couple of weeks. I really don't mind running a copy or two of this guy in most of my white aggressive decks. Khenra Spellspear is an insanely good uncommon card in red, better than the majority of red's rares and mythics, and yet I still see this card going incredibly late in packs. If you see this early, you should probably be taking it. Mutagen Connoisseur is a huge miss in the format and is not at all a reason to get into blue-green. If you see these late, don't take them as signals to jump ship on whatever you're already doing. Thanks for tuning in for the second meta update of March of the Machine. I hope you're able to use this information to help you in your next draft, and I'll see you soon for more content here on the Daily Draft channel.